Just about everything I know about Donald Trump's ties to Russia, I know from our next guest. Joining us by phone, my friend and colleague, Rachel Maddow. Rachel, I've been dying since I saw this morning to know your thoughts.
Oh, well, I had different thoughts until you just said something that blew my mind. You just broke a pretty significant piece of news, Nicole. Could you just reiterate what you said about Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein still overseeing Mueller and not Whitaker?
I think people that cover this have known this to be the case. I think it's something that people check in on a daily basis. Is the special counsel investigation still under the direction and management of the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, as it has been since its inception? And I'm told today, just before we came on the air, that is still the case. The charge brought against Michael Cohen today, as I think Matt or Frank said, has Special Counsel Mueller's signature on it. That went through the same office that all of the indictments and charging documents have gone through since the Special Counsel has existed. That's the Deputy Attorney General's office and his staff's office. And I'm told that Matt Whitaker, as of this moment, this can always change, has not involved himself yet in any of the machinations of the Special Counsel probe.
That is remarkable, and that's brand new reporting, and it may be the sort of thing that a lot of people have been wondering about, but I have not seen that reported anywhere before you just broke that news, and that's a really big deal. I mean, part of my initial reaction to hearing this news today was, okay, is Robert Mueller somehow throttled compared to how he used to be able to conduct his investigation and pursue prosecutions related to this matter? Is he unable to bring new indictments because Matt Whitaker won't approve them? Is he unable to take other major steps? Is he acting the way that we've seen over the past few days with the sort of augmentation of this, the situation that he's got with Paul Manafort, the friction now with Manafort, the rescinding of his plea deal, opening this new line within the Michael Cohen inquiry? We saw a draft indictment, not a real indictment, but a draft indictment from Mueller's office for Jerome Corsi. Are we seeing these sorts of developments from Mueller because Mueller is otherwise constrained, and without Whitaker, he'd be acting in some different manner, and this is a sort of a new phase of the special counsel's investigation? But if what you're saying is true, and the investigation continues to be overseen by Rosenstein, it just puts a very different cast on this, and I think it makes it actually makes me feel like this must be a much more ominous moment for the White House, because if Mueller is proceeding without being throttled, without being stymied, and he's proceeding at this kind of a pace, rolling out this stuff right now, everything is aiming right at the president personally, and that's got to be very unsettling for them.
Let me just, because you've made me nervous by accusing me of breaking news and covering let me pull Mike Schmidt into this conversation. I'm sweating here. Is this consistent with what you and your colleagues are reporting about the management of the special counsel investigation? And it's my understanding that a lot of these things have been in motion for months, many, many months and weeks, even before Matt Whitaker assumed his new role.
The way that it works is that the Deputy Attorney General oversees, all major investigations. Everything sort of goes through that office. The difference before under Jeff Sessions was that there was not someone above Rod Rosenstein, because Jeff Sessions was recused. In this case, Whitaker is not recused, at least not yet, but the same structure still exists. Rod Rosenstein is still the Deputy Attorney General, and all investigations still pass through his office. The difference is that on major decisions, there's another desk that a decision could go to, and that would be to the acting attorney general's desk. I guess by this reporting, it shows that has not happened yet. But Rosenstein, regardless of anything, would still continue to run this investigation simply based on the normal structure of the Justice Department, the way it's supposed to work.
But Rachel, I mean, you hit on an important point. I think once the president realizes how ominous sometimes he has like a 2-day delay, like the way I sometimes read my print newspapers. I mean, there's sometimes a 2-day delay to his reaction. And I don't want to sort of project any false sense of security about the probe. I think it's in as much jeopardy, and you see Democrats and Republicans on Capitol Hill trying to secure it. But can you just take us down the road of why it's so ominous? I mean, there's stuff in here about Felix Sater. There's stuff in here about the ties to Russia. There's stuff in here that we've long sort of hoped that Mueller would get his arms around. We now have evidence that his arms are very much wrapped tightly around a pretty sophisticated understanding of Trump Organization's attempted business dealings in Russia.
The problem here for the president is the plot that was just revealed in the Cohen documents. And what is revealed, if you just sort of step back from it, is that the president and his business were actively involved in negotiating probably the biggest business deal of Trump's life in Moscow, including direct negotiations with the Kremlin during the president's campaign, and they were lying about it at the time, and they have lied about it since, and they have engaged in a fairly elaborate effort to cover it up. And the time when they were secretly negotiating what would have probably been the biggest deal of his life with the Kremlin, at that same time, the Kremlin was intervening illegally in U.S. politics to help Trump win the election.
There's some dates in the document, too, that I'm sure sort of rang out to you. We had to do a little bit of research to find them. But the filing in the court case lists dates around the time that negotiations over Trump Tower Moscow ended. And it may be worth noting which dates Mueller chose to include in the filing today. There's always something intentional about what he adds. He writes, from on or about June 9th to June 14th, 2016, individual 2, who we believe to be Felix Sater, an intermediary between Trump and Russia, sent numerous messages to Cohen about the travel, including forms for Cohen to complete. However, on about June 14th, Cohen met individual 2 in the lobby of the company's headquarters to inform him that he wouldn't be traveling. Turns out June 9th and June 14th are dates all of your viewers know well. June 9th was the infamous Trump Tower meeting, and June 14th was the date we first learned that the DNC was hacked by the Russians. Do you think these are coincidences?
No. There's a reason those dates are in there, because this is, as Matt was explaining just a moment ago, these Mueller and his team don't speak publicly, but they do tend to speak through their public-facing documents. And so they are speaking to us through this document the way they have with everything else they filed in court. But it also shows us unequivocally that Mueller has evidence enough to bring a criminal charge related to it, that while Russia was actively intervening in our election to hurt Hillary Clinton and help Donald Trump, Trump was doing business with Russia, which meant specifically doing business with the Kremlin and lying about it. And that is the story. I mean, that is, we don't know what other business there might have been. We don't know what other business negotiations may have been involved in this, but here's one that Mueller has apparently proved. To the extent that he's been able to obtain a criminal conviction in conjunction with it. And so the whole no collusion thing will have to be differently phrased from here on out. But this is about the president's behavior and the president's links to Russia and the president's financial links to Russia. And this is Mueller showing that that's what he's got.
And Rachel, it seems that if you just take June 9th, when they were talking about a trip to Russia, when they're talking about working with the Vladimir Putin's name is in the document today, too. They're talking about working with the highest level of the Russian government on the same day that his son was in Trump Tower meeting with Russians in a meeting pitched as our government's effort to help you.
Yeah.
You know, sort of like cutting into a 7-layer cake and seeing what's inside. Do we now have the conspiracy sort of lined up on the axis of these specific dates?
Yes, we do. And we also have a sense of the literal criminal liability, not just the, bad associations or evidence of bad behavior, but literal criminal liability of the president's immediate nuclear family, right? We have now seen for the first time somebody associated with this scandal charged for lying to Congress. We've had reporting from Vanity Fair first and other subsequent reporting indicating that the president's eldest son, Donald Trump Jr., is actively concerned about being prosecuted specifically for having lied to Congress about this incident. We know that this incident is now, through the timing unveiled in today's documents, materially related to a secret business transaction the president was pursuing with the Kremlin while he was publicly lying about it. And that was all at the same time that the Kremlin was intervening actively to help him. So this is all of a piece. And if you don't believe that the president has loyalty to anybody who works for him and he's willing to call anybody a rat no matter how much they've helped him or worked with him in the past, I don't think anybody would say that he believes that about his eldest son or his daughter Ivanka or his son Eric. I think that to the extent that he and his immediate family members are now in danger of being nailed for felonies, I think that that should be understood as something that will unsettle the president, if not dramatically change the trajectory of how the White House reacts to this ongoing investigation.
And I think if they heard any of that, they may be sharpening their pardon pencils as we speak. Rachel, I know what you're usually doing right now. I'm so grateful that you spent some time with us. I can't wait to watch you tonight. Thank you.
Congratulations on your scoop.
Oh. Thank you.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.